The following program is made possible with support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Faith Salie.
And I'm Heather Berlin. We're going to be reviewing current movies, TV shows, and sometimes checking out a blast from the past, but from a scientific point of view.
Today, we're going to look at the Bradley Cooper flick Burnt. Written by Stephen Knight and directed by John Wells, Burnt is the story of Adam Jones, once a top chef in Paris, now a recovering addict trying to get his life back together and earn the chance to try for a third Michelin star.
You're the best. The rest of us need you to lead us to places we otherwise wouldn't go.
It's my daughter Lily's birthday.
I want a cake. No cake. You're a chef. You can make cakes, right?
You're the ogre, the one who shouts.
Yes, but I bake great cakes.
Good.
I've had better.
Really?
We're joined today by Professor Kent Kirshenbaum, Director of Graduate Studies in NYU's Chemistry Department. Kent spends part of his time researching polymers and peptides and part of his time as the co-founder of NYU's Experimental Cuisine Collective, which is on the forefront of the molecular gastronomy movement.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Okay, is all cooking chemistry?
It really is. And not only that, but it's virtually all biochemistry. And as a professor of biochemistry, that's what really appeals to me. It's thinking about how we're making modifications, transformations of food, biological molecules, to get them to bring their components together and create flavors, or to modify their textures or make them more digestible. And flavor development is a really important part of what happens when we go into the kitchen to cook. Those are chemical transformations.
In the movie, Bradley Cooper's character, Adam Jones, has been out of the top world of restaurants for about 3 years. He comes back to find everybody is cooking in plastic bags. So what's that all about? Why is everybody cooking in plastic bags?
It's a type of cooking called sous-vide cooking, which takes a completely different approach towards cooking fish or meat. And it is this notion that we can cook much more precisely. Instead of trying to get, let's say, a piece of duck to 145 degrees by putting it in an oven at 350 and trying to time it just right, instead, the idea is to put that piece of food into a constant temperature bath with a circulator to bring it to precisely the right temperature, because that's the temperature of the surrounding bath.
Sous vide means in French, I know sous is under.
Under
vide?
Vacuum.
Under vacuum.
And so the food is placed in plastic bags. The air is removed with a vacuum chamber. Those bags are sealed and then placed in the constant temperature bath. We no longer have to do this vacuum sealing. You can even use a Ziploc bag. That works just fine as well. But the term has stuck, the sous vide cooking approach. And actually, if you're really curious about sous vide cooking, I happen to have a machine right here.
Oh, it must be very small. Where is it?
It's actually quite compact.
It is small.
And in fact, I can cook you guys a beautiful piece of cod right here in the studio. And so what I have right here is an immersion circulator that can control the temperature of this water bath to 1/10 of a degree Celsius. And that allows us to control the temperature at which certain proteins, and not others, are unfolding in that beautiful piece of fish.
Is it on right now?
It's on right now. In fact, we're cooking even as we speak.
What are we having, Kent?
It's set to 55.6 degrees Celsius, and that is just the right temperature to cook up this beautiful piece of cod. I've put some Bombay spices on there, and you can see that it's undergoing this great transformation and turning into a really lovely dish. And down in the bottom there, I also have some eggs, and this also corresponds to a much more precise way of cooking, that you can control the texture of eggs really wonderfully when you control the temperature very precisely. When you go into a restaurant, a few years from now, you might be ordering a 64-degree egg instead of a hard-boiled egg or a soft-boiled egg. It's those kinds of precision cooking techniques that are really going to allow us to control textures and flavors.
How do they know what temperature? How do you know what temperature is the best to cook which food at?
Right. Well, people have done research. There's a huge book called The Modernist Cuisine that has explored sous-vide cooking and evaluates exactly at what temperature you might want to cook a piece of salmon or a duck leg. And so you can look this information up, get access to other people's results, and cook in this very precise way.
In the movie, the kitchen of Adam's nemesis has a lot of cooking instruments that look a lot like they've come straight out of a laboratory. So are chefs using scientific equipment in a new way now?
Right. There's one amazing scene where Adam Jones comes absolutely drunk into this high-tech kitchen. He's sprawled out on the floor and he looks up and he thinks that he sees something that looks like it came straight out of my lab. In fact, he is looking at something like that. It's called a rotary evaporator. And what it does is it removes solvent from our chemical reactions. And here's the idea. If we want to concentrate flavors, what do chefs do? They remove water. And they usually do that by heating up their sauces and making a reduction. But as they're doing that heating, they're changing the flavor components. What if we could concentrate our flavors not by heating our sauce, but by reducing the pressure and therefore driving off all the water that's present in our sauce without having to heat it? And that's what the rotary evaporator is all about. And it's a fantastic transformation of cooking technology from a laboratory environment to a cooking environment.
And is it like, because people say when you cook vegetables, whatever, it breaks them down and it takes the nutrients out of it. So right. Can this technique help to sort of preserve the nutrients in the food rather than breaking them down with the heat?
Sure. Many of the micronutrients that we really want to retain in our foods, they're only so stable. They're thermolabile. And so if we end up heating them to high temperature in order to concentrate those flavors, well, we're getting a more concentrated flavor, but we're changing that flavor profile and perhaps destroying some of the nutrients at the same time.
Okay, Kent, let's go really basic.
Yeah.
What happens to food when we heat it?
It depends what the food is. It depends what the temperatures are. But let's say we take a piece of meat. What we want to do is denature some of the proteins and create differences in texture to make it more enjoyable as we put it in our mouths and as we begin to taste it. At the same time, heating also creates changes in the flavor profile. One of these reactions is known as the Maillard reaction or the Browning reaction, and that's literally the...
I'm a big fan of that, right? It's what makes our bread, muffins, and umami tastes, and sorry, go ahead.
Right.
Love Maillard reaction.
Yeah, some of my favorite chefs like to say that browning is flavor development, and these are the same sorts of transformations. They create that nice, rich golden color in your toast. They provide that nice crust on the outside of a roast beef.
Chemically speaking, what exactly happens?
Yeah, sugar molecules react with amine groups that are present on the amino acids that make up our protein molecules. And it's actually a very complex chemical transformation that gives rise to dozens, hundreds of different products. These products have both color and they also have flavors that we can sense. These are many cases the same types of chemical flavor components that you might get in putting whiskey in a wooden cask. So these are the kinds of flavor molecules that will be developed through these Maillard reactions.
Does that reaction only happen at a certain temperature, or does it have to be the amount of time? Is there a time element and temperature separately or both? Or?
The higher the temperature, the faster the reactions go. That's why we can come in with our Searsol, these blow torches, and complete these reactions within a period of a minute. These reactions also can take place at very slow rates at relatively ambient temperatures. And so this is why we might age a whiskey over a very long period of time in a wooden cask. In these cases, these transformations may take place over a period of years rather than a period of a few minutes.
So in order to cook something, do you have to apply heat? I mean, there's maceration and curing and my ceviche, right? It comes raw, but it's not really raw.
Right. Not everything needs to be heated to be cooked. And ceviche is a great example where that same denaturation of proteins, the unfolding of proteins, can be induced by an acidic environment, by our lime or lemon juice. So these are the kinds of molecular transformations that occur that don't necessarily need to be induced by application of heat. One of the things that I think is really interesting as far as instruments going from the lab to the kitchen is the use of ultrasound. We use it all the time to dissolve things, and now chefs are beginning to pay attention. Maybe we can cook through the use of sound instead of by putting things in the oven. Isn't that cool?
Wait, like how? How would that work?
Literally, there's an ultrasonic wand that you can put into either a chemical reaction or into a soup. And you can pulse that and create bursts of energy that will pop apart tissue and that will release flavors that exist with inside cellular structures so that we can enjoy them, some of those umami flavors that you were just talking about.
Would it heat it too? It releases flavors?
Well, it's kind of like a physical, sound is a physical entity, so it kind of is physically changing the chemical structure of the food.
Does it create heat though?
It can. So as the ultrasound impinges upon the surrounding environment, it can create these small bubbles, which is great. And as those bubbles then collapse, the temperatures locally can go very high, while the overall temperature doesn't really increase all that much.
So
really
using some of these techniques, like how can we use science to actually just improve the flavor of the foods?
Well, I think by understanding what the chemical requirements are for these flavor development reactions. One example is this Maillard reaction, this browning reaction that we were talking about before. What are the requirements? We need to have proteins in the presence of sugars at elevated temperatures and in a slightly basic environment. And so when I cook a chicken with a nice citrus marinade, that's really tasty, but because of that low pH, that acidic pH, I don't get that browning development that I might want. So instead, what I might do is brown the outside of my chicken before I begin this cooking process to get that flavor development, and then go ahead and put my citrus marinade on it. And it's interesting that this sous-vide cooking technique also does not develop those Maillard reactions precisely because the temperature doesn't go up high enough. As a result, chefs are now cooking sous vide, heating up their protein, their fish, their meat, and then using Searsol to run it over the outside of that food and create that nice browning reaction.
It's like almost like photoshopping your food at the end of the day. You know?
Yeah, just get
just get that little
flavor
filter.
tweak.
Flavor filter.
Yeah.
The flavor tweak, right.
Okay, Kent, I understand you've broken down something that's near and dear to my heart, barbecue, to its most elemental components.
Right.
Please describe why barbecue is so delicious.
Barbecue is so delicious because of the physical transformations that happen in that meat as we cook it low and slow. And for these reasons, the proteins that are present in something like a brisket, what you want to be able to do is break down that collagen, take something that would be otherwise really tough, break down those tough protein molecules, get them to unfold, and get those fibers in that meat to slide against one another and just to create something that's succulent and juicy.
I have to say something. We've had tons of scientists on this show. That's what we're about, right? But rarely do you hear a scientist speak about what he or she does with like poetry and, you know, like, well, I'm getting really hungry. It's kind of sexy and it's like poetry.
Succulent and juicy.
Right?
I mean, food is sexy though, and that's,
It's sexy, and it's also something that takes place in all of our homes. And this is an example of the fact that science is not something that the guys in the white coats do in those buildings somewhere far away. Science is something that takes place all around us on a daily basis. There is science in your kitchen. There is science going on when you put your toast in the toaster or when you hard boil your egg.
What's the most sort of science-y thing you do at home in your kitchen? Like taking your work home with you? You're making a meal? Yeah. What do you do?
The most science-y thing that I've been doing at home is when my kids have had birthday parties, I'll bring home a big tub of liquid nitrogen, and I will make ice cream for my kids right there by taking an ice cream base and pouring in the liquid nitrogen, beating it up, and making ice cream right there at home.
That is so much better than a bouncy castle. Yeah. That is so cool.
It's fun, and once again, it's not going to create fantastic ice cream for you. That's not the idea, but it's a new process by which you can, sort of express your own creativity. For me, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make ice cream that tasted like s'mores. And so what I did is I took my graham crackers, I put them in the toaster oven, ran that Maillard reaction, got that flavor development, threw that in my ice cream base along with some marshmallows, And then I added a little bit of liquid smoke, then the liquid nitrogen, and then whipped it all up, and I got that nice smoky burnt flavor all throughout that ice cream. It was terrific.
But a lot of people are fearful of the sort of intersection between science and food. And is there actually anything to really be afraid of?
I think there is. I really do think that there are things to be afraid of, because as we introduce ingredients into our foods that didn't exist before, we have perhaps we might have a tendency to respond in a negative way, to have that influence our metabolism in unanticipated ways. And these transformations that are happening to our food systems are happening so rapidly that it's much faster than the pace of evolution has to be able to respond. So I think that it really does make sense to give deep thought to what ingredients are being put in our foods, and to also be concerned about new cooking processes. Just because we can do things in the laboratory or in the kitchen doesn't mean that we should do these things.
But you do more than just cook. You're a professor of chemistry at NYU. So what do you do in your non-cooking lab?
My PhD is in pharmaceutical chemistry, and I think a great deal about drug design, about crafting molecules, getting them to fold up in just the right ways so that they'll hit targets within your body and then alter the pathways that might give rise to a disease state. Right now we're working on new antibiotics, and we're also working on new therapeutics for prostate cancer. So that's my day job, and then what we do for science outreach really relates into this area of science and cooking.
Okay, folding. Please explain to me what a polymer is and why it's such a big deal that it folds or unfolds.
Right. A polymer is a chain molecule. You can think of it as beads on a string, with each bead being an individual unit that's connected through chemical bonds to the neighboring bead. You can imagine that polymer chain being floppy and extending in all kinds of different ways, but you could think about tuning in forces that interact between the different positions on that chain, so the chain folds up under its own direction to create a very specific three-dimensional shape. That's what happens with the proteins in our body. They have this intrinsic ability to fold to a particular three-dimensional conformation, and that's why they carry out these amazing tasks within our cells. They catalyze reactions, they carry information from one place to another, they carry oxygen through our body because of the way that they fold. Now here's an interesting question. What if we could go into the laboratory and create polymer molecules that never existed before, and somehow encode within that polymer chain all the information that's needed to get that molecule to fold up in a precise way? It hasn't really been done, but we're going to give it a shot, and hopefully we'll be successful. And if we are, we'll be able to create synthetic molecules that fold and function the way that proteins do within our body.
Does the folding and unfolding happen in molecular gastronomy too? Is that what's happening when we're cooking?
It does. And in fact, these are the same transformations that we were talking about when we were talking about barbecue. The proteins that are present in muscle tissue, in meat, they unfold at a particular temperature. And we can dial in those temperatures to get certain proteins to unfold and create the texture responses that we want. Yeah.
Just the fact that you called meat muscle tissue, which of course it is, makes me think about being a vegan today.
Right. But you know what? Scientists have a great role to play in the whole vegan movement as well. There are many people who would adopt a vegan lifestyle or move to a more plant-based diet if they could get that same taste response from plant-based recipes. So there is now an opportunity to create meat substitutes using plant proteins, and to take those plant proteins and treat them in a way so that they have meat-like flavors and meat-like textures. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to create much more sustainable foods and to create a better food system by moving away from a more animal-based diet towards a more plant-based diet.
When describing his work, Kent has compared some of his research to the storyline in the movie Fantastic Voyage.
In that 1966 film, a team of Americans in a nuclear submarine are shrunk down to the size of a cell and injected into the body of a scientist who has developed a blood clot in his brain.
4 men and a beautiful girl, off on a fantastic voyage, actually entering inside the human body, exploring an unknown universe, unknown dangers.
Your work is in crafting molecules. How is that like this film?
Right. Well, it's thinking about what's going on within our cells at the very smallest levels, at the levels that we can't see with our naked eye. We either have to create new tools to visualize what's happening at those levels. Perhaps at some point we may be able to shrink ourselves down. I doubt it. But we think about the three-dimensional organization of proteins. And so when we do that, we need to be able to see inside these molecules. We'll put on 3D goggles and we will take a look at three-dimensional representations of the molecules that we make, and we'll kind of swim around inside these structures and see what parts of the molecule are connecting with others. We're working on a project right now where we have 3 elements on one strand of a protein interacting with 2 elements on the other, and we need to figure out exactly how they're interdigitating. So we use these visualization tools to swim through the protein structure and really see what's happening as these molecules begin to fold out.
So was it something that specific about this film that inspired you, or was it just the idea of impossible science is just, good for the kinds of things that you do?
Right. I think one of the things that captivated me was the idea that if you really want to do a great job of delivering a drug molecule, you don't want it to go everywhere throughout the body. You really want to exert your effect exactly at the right time in the right place. That's really difficult to imagine doing unless you had the ability to shrink yourself down along with your submarine and go into somebody's body. But we're now creating nanostructured materials that are able to migrate through the body and hone in on particular tissue types so that they can deliver their drug molecules exactly where they're needed. So in that sense, perhaps some of the concepts that were explored in that movie are now coming to fruition.
We're definitely seeing more realistic stories of scientists these days, but they're kind of a little fuzzy on the path that scientists take to get to where they are. In addition to all the things we've talked about today, you are the director of NYU's graduate studies?
I am. For the Department of Chemistry, I'm the director of graduate studies.
Okay, so how does a young scientist get to be you? What kind of path can a young scientist take?
Years and years of training, working in the laboratory, late nights and long hours, trying to create new discoveries and to find out what that process of discovery is like. And in that sense, perhaps being a PhD level chemist or a postdoctoral researcher is sort of like being a sous chef. Working alongside a master, learning their sensibility and their way of discovering new things, and just appreciating the deep commitment and professionalism, the mastery of technique that must go into their craft before they're really able to go out into the world and lead their own crew. I think that those analogies certainly exist, and it's something that we try to establish in the chemistry department at New York University.
But wait, are you as cruel to your postdocs as
Adam
was
in the kitchen
to his sous chefs? Like when they do something wrong, you just smash all the test tubes everywhere and say, "Do it again."
That's not my style, but
I've known some supervisors who
really
are pretty nasty, I have to say. I mean, not throwing stuff all over the lab, but there are some people out there, not as bad as Adam in the film.
I think that there are so many different ways to inspire people and to motivate people. Fear is a very powerful motivator, and so some supervisors try to instill that sense of fear. It's also a very important personal motivator, and I think that Adam Jones was very fearful that he wouldn't receive that 3rd Michelin star, and that fear was what really drove him to accomplish so much in his kitchen. But I prefer to motivate my students in a different way by emphasizing the opportunity that we have, number one, to be creative, to exert our ability to create new molecular architectures, and also to have an impact on the world. Because if we do a good job at creating new antibiotics or new cancer therapeutics, then certainly we will have a really positive impact on the world.
From knowing you and knowing how hard and long you work and what you're describing, it does seem like the metaphor is, becoming a scientist is a process, and it's a slow cooker.
Oh, right. And for every one of those discoveries that you get to have, it only comes about through days, weeks, months, years in the lab.
The average age, because you talk about young scientists, the average age of a person getting their first independent grant, being the principal investigator, is around 40 years old.
Wow.
So literally people are doing postdocs or being like sous chefs, one after the other for years and years until maybe around the age 40, they get their first big grant. Right. So it's a long, long process. Yeah. Yeah. That's still considered a young scientist.
Wow.
Which I like.
I know.
That's a good thing.
I give you, I don't know, 5 Michelin stars, Kent, for being here today. Thank you.
Is that a thing?
I don't know. We just made it up.
I'll take them.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm very hungry now. That's about all we have time for today. Thank you, Kent.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And don't forget to check us out on the web at CUNY.tv under the Science tab, where you'll find past shows, additional content, and a link to our app.